Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Demystifying Money. We're going to talk about the nonprofit space today. This is something that's come up with a lot of clients that I've talked to, people who are interested in either starting a nonprofit, working with a nonprofit, but there is so much confusion about how they work, how they operate, and how people actually make a living and make a profit working in the nonprofit space. So I invited my friend Amanda LaFleur. She is the founder and the executive director of the nonprofit organization for philanthropic initiatives, also known as Nopi for the rest of the podcast, because that's a lot to say. And she has created really a business that helps people in this space, which I think is super smart and so needed. And she has, a dynamic nonprofit incubator that offers fiscal sponsorship, technical assistance, and strategic support to emerging charitable projects and under-resourced nonprofits. So, Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
So I think that there's a lot of good work that comes out of the nonprofit space, but I do know that lately in the current, um, you know, currently we're seeing, a lot of changes as far as funding and government grants and things like that. So just from your perspective, what is the current state for nonprofits and how can people who have an interest or maybe they have started one, but they're feeling like a little bit confused or maybe anxious with what's going on, what are you seeing from your perspective when it comes to nonprofit work today?
That is such a great question. There's a lot going on in the
Mhm.
nonprofit space right now. So, kind of from a macro level, the nonprofit environment has faced a lot of shifting landscape and challenges and unknowns this year alone, which feels like 50 years in
Yes.
1 year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, right from the get-go, the start of this year and the current administration, we heard a lot in the news and in the nonprofit sector about executive orders that very much specifically targeted the nonprofit sector. And we saw, I can't remember, it was earlier in the year, maybe the first quarter, we saw news articles that were very real about federal grants that
Mhm.
were pledged to nonprofits across the United States, small and large, that were frozen,
Mhm.
that a lot of nonprofits were uncertain if they could get the funds that they were promised by the federal government. So there was a freeze that went into place that was very confusing, very destabilizing. And then kind of now, with the current government shutdown, there's
Mhm.
nothing being processed.
Yes.
There's no applications being taken. There's no 501(c)(3) nonprofit applications
Mhm.
being reviewed or accepted. So there's really a lot going on in the world that is very much making, the financial future of a lot of nonprofits quite uncertain. But I think what's amazing about nonprofits is that most nonprofit leaders, we come from uncertain times ourselves. Like
Mhm.
most nonprofits are started by people that come here through a lived experience or some challenge that they have gone through. So if they've gone through that challenge and now they've decided to create an organization that not only helps other people, but creates a livelihood for themselves, they kind of come equipped already with a
Mhm.
certain malleability that they're able to shift, that they're able to problem solve. So I think even in uncertain times, if you've got the right leadership in place, they're able to pivot and keep things going along.
I think that's a great point that most, nonprofit leaders, like they're not coming from an easy path. It's not
Mm-mm.
necessarily like the path of least resistance when it comes to making a living or doing work. But can you share how did you get started in this nonprofit space and what led you to founding your business?
Yeah, so this is actually my third nonprofit organization I started. My first one was very informal, grassroots. I was like baking cupcakes with my dear friend Brooke back in Denver, and we would sell cupcakes at Pride Fest in
Mhm.
Denver. And it was to raise money for marriage equality until it became legal. And then we no longer needed to do that. Hopefully, we won't have to be doing that again in the future.
Right.
But again, it was a very grassroots thing. It was nothing formal. Like we
Mhm.
never applied for nonprofit status. We were just out there fundraising and then donating those proceeds. The second organization I started was much more formal. That was the International Association for Premenstrual Disorders. And again, as I mentioned, a lot of people start nonprofits because they have some lived experience.
Mhm.
So I had gone through my own mental health challenges, and I didn't see an organization that was specifically helping women with reproductive or hormone-based mental health challenges. So I was able to connect with other amazing women really around the world
Mhm.
that were also struggling with those same things. And we started this organization in 2014, and it's still going strong today. But I will say, during those many first years, like so many other people, I came to this nonprofit space without any experience. I didn't go to
Right.
college to run a nonprofit. I didn't work for another nonprofit.
Mhm.
It was just, I wanted to make a change, and I had to learn very quickly on the fly so much about just nonprofit business. Um, yeah, so having gone through that experience after about 6 to 8 years of being there with that organization, I really wanted to create another nonprofit or another organization that could help other individuals with my same experience of just trying to start a nonprofit, but not having any nonprofit experience.
So was there a time when you noticed that huge gap that was emerging with like how nonprofits are supported, especially around like their financial systems and their stability, where I mean, were people coming to you for help? Like how did you decide like actually this piece of it is a business by itself that should be operational? Like was there something that happened
Yeah.
or continued to happen that led you there?
I mean, yeah, I would just say, just I was very lucky in the IAPMD that I was surrounded by other amazing women that
Mhm.
had varying degrees of their own nonprofit or business experience. And to be fair to myself, I did come from the small business world.
Mhm.
I had other small for-profit businesses I had started in the 10 years leading up to starting my first nonprofit. So I had some varying level of experience, our board president, other people that were involved. But I think what we experienced as an organization, what I continue to see in the work I'm doing today, is just really widespread, like financial illiteracy when it comes to running a business. And I'm going to speak mostly today about nonprofit
Mhm.
financial literacy,
Yeah.
because it's at the end of the day, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, it's very much the same.
Right.
You need to make money to stay open, keep your doors
Yes.
open. Yeah, but I think financial literacy has been a huge challenge that I see all the time
Mhm.
across the sector and the varying programs we help. And then capacity.
Mhm.
A lot of nonprofit organizations lack the human and financial capacity to help their organizations grow.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part. Even, like you said, the similarities between for-profit business and like a lot of times there's somebody who has an amazing idea, amazing product, amazing service, and those issues with that financial literacy part and capacity can impact everybody. But what are some of the economic struggles that you see as far as nonprofits go, like with their funding cycles, grants, and overhead? What are some
Mhm.
of those, what are some things that organizations can start to think about like day one when it comes to the financial side of running a nonprofit?
Yeah, so something that we do at NOPI is called
Hmm.
fiscal sponsorship.
Okay.
And it is a practice where we, as a nonprofit, established nonprofit organization, can adopt other informal or registered nonprofits. It doesn't matter where they are, if they have designation or not. And we can provide to them a lot of the things that someone just starting out really needs to be thinking about. And this is going to be a long laundry list and maybe
Yeah,
quite
no, I
boring, but
think
I'll
that
give
it's
you
really good to
the
hear.
highlights.
What are
I'll
those
try to
things?
give you the highlights. So I'm going to put on one side, like we had a table in front of us,
Hmm.
like all the pieces we need to build a nonprofit.
Okay.
There's going to be one plate that is full of compliance, and that is your state registrations, your federal registrations, yada, yada, yada. That is
Hmm.
all on one plate. The next plate is going to be what I'll call your tech stack. And that is going to be like, what is your bookkeeping platform? How are we going to manage money in and money out? And for most nonprofits, that ends up being something like QuickBooks. And then you got to have things like we're going to have email addresses. So an administrative technical that most nonprofits use like a Google Workspace for nonprofits. There's so much more on that plate. It's a huge plate, but you want to
Mhm.
think about what technology is your organization going to be built upon? Because that's huge. You've got to keep track of every
Mhm.
donation that comes in and out. Where our organization's going through our first audit, and they
Yeah.
want every receipt, every
Yeah.
piece of paper. That's all your tech stack. You got to keep that together. And then the other plate is going to be, how are we going to fund this? And
Mhm.
there's probably other pieces on the table, like what is our
What do
theory
we
of
do?
change?
Yeah.
What is our mission? How are we going to do this? Who are the people who are going to be doing
Yeah.
that? There's so many plates on this table.
Mhm.
But yeah, so when you're starting out, you've got to kind of think about all of these things. Um, where fiscal sponsorship can help is fiscal sponsorship already has the table made and set. You're just joining the table. We have a chair for you. You can come and join our table, and we've got everything ready to go. And you can just focus on your mission and grow from there. As far as the financial side, I know I'm saying a lot
Mhm.
in one part here, but the financial piece I really want people to think about is the days of starting a nonprofit with the assumption like, oh, we're going to get grants. Like that is not I don't know if it ever actually worked that way,
Yeah.
to be honest, from the beginning, because most grant makers, like a foundation, so take like the Boston Foundation, for
Mhm.
example, or any type of corporate foundation, like a lot of banks have
Mhm.
foundations, they are looking to give grants to organizations that have been around for at least 3 years.
Okay.
So when you're starting a nonprofit and you're thinking about how are we going to fund this, it's not going to be grants to start.
Okay.
Having said that, I've definitely seen nonprofits get started with grants, like accelerator grants or seed
Mhm.
funding. It's not
Mhm.
impossible, but most want to see at least 3 years of some success activity. So the other part of that is really changed, especially this year, is federal grants.
Mhm.
Again, they're very unpredictable at this time. They're very limited. There's so many executive orders that have come out
Yeah.
that, while don't change law, make the application process very uncertain and
Mhm.
very kind of like not a guarantee.
Yeah.
So we're really taking federal grants off the table. State grants do still exist.
Mhm.
So that is another viable source. State funding is still available for a lot of things, especially here in Massachusetts. Are your listeners mostly here in Massachusetts?
Most of them are. We do have
Yeah.
people in other parts, but mostly, yeah, in the United States, where I think
Yeah.
statewide you can kind of look to your state and get that information too and think about it, especially if, like you said, if the federal grant side is just limited, narrow, maybe confusing at this point, so not a guarantee. But that's interesting about it makes sense that other larger organizations that are giving money out through there, are looking for someone who's been around for 3 years and has that level of, experience or because starting out like a new nonprofit, it's a relatively, I'm guessing the beginning is kind of a shaky time when it comes to, being fragile financially as far as, a business is concerned. So I think that having that fiscal sponsorship sounds like, I don't know, other firms might have, associations that kind of help you get all the things that you need, other things that kind of because I imagine that if people want to start a nonprofit, their first thought is not regulations and compliance,
Right. No, totally not. They are like,
especially if they haven't
yeah.
worked in a regulated industry, because you're in a
Hmm.
highly regulated industry. Like,
Correct. Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
everybody is looking at
Especially in
that.
Massachusetts. Yeah.
Especially here. Yeah, it is very important where like that is such a big piece of it. That is really like learning a whole nother language in some
Hmm.
ways. So I think that is I think that's really important. What are some other like money moves that you think like businesses can do first to kind of start to build some resilience or to kind of,
Yeah.
make sure that they're ready to launch or to get started?
Yeah, well, I will tell you this based on my own experience and what I've seen in the work that we do. When it comes to nonprofit work, and this is what I think comes to mind for a lot of people in outside of the
Mhm.
nonprofit space or transitioning to the nonprofit space, is that a lot of it is done for free or it's donated or
Mhm.
no one should be paid. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The
Okay.
nonprofit sector, it's called the third sector for a reason. I don't have the numbers off the top of my
Mhm.
mind, but it supports the livelihood of so many people. So, something to really think about when you're getting started is one, building a budget.
Hmm.
And it's okay because if you just don't know all the hard numbers, it's about making educated guesses. Budgets are like, business plans. They're
Hmm.
meant to be changed. They're a
Yeah.
roadmap, and you're going to change it as you learn and as you're developing. But something I really like to tell people is, yes, you can start your nonprofit tomorrow. You can just
Hmm.
start doing good work. Say you want to, help people facing homelessness here in
Hmm.
Boston. You could literally go out in the street and just start doing that.
Hmm.
But is that sustainable in the long term if you're not getting compensated for your time, if you don't have access to financial and human resources or other resources that you need? It's not sustainable. You're not going to get to do that for very long. So I think when you're getting started, one of the biggest things to think about is building that budget and
Hmm.
then planning, or how are you going to pay the person or people that are going to be running it and doing the work?
Yeah. No, I think
Yeah,
that's so
especially,
important.
yeah, absolutely. And so one thing I left off too in the last question you said when thinking about funding, again, talking about how do we fund
Hmm.
the leadership and the administrative cost of doing nonprofit work is, federal grants might not be an option right now. Corporate and state grants typically want to see 3 years. Although if you have a fiscal sponsor, that accelerates
Yeah.
that kind of 3-year limit because you've got a larger
You got
organization
that.
behind you. But you're going to be looking for individual donations. So that
Mhm.
could start with your family, your friends, people in your community, people with a personal connection to the work that you're doing. So this kind of like, if you think of money in a cake form, you've
Mhm.
got your individual contributions, your grants. And the other thing to really learn about is large donors and large gifts. And those will be identifying like maybe 1 to 5, so maybe three large
Mhm.
donors. And those are people we're talking like a $10,000 donation, a
Mhm.
$20,000 donation. That is really going to be the biggest part of that cake.
Mhm.
Someone described it to me so well. I love cake. So
No, it makes sense.
just
Like you can see how
yeah,
it layers. Yeah. No,
yeah, it
that
layers up, and like, and cake's fun. Who doesn't want the
makes
cake?
sense.
But yeah, it's really thinking about how are we going to diversify our revenue. We're not going to count one just alone on grants. We're not going to count just alone on individual contributions. Another thing to diversify income that a lot of revenue that a lot of people don't think about with nonprofits, because we hear nonprofit and think no money.
Mhm.
But the truth of it is, another way to diversify your revenue is developing revenue streams like consulting or
Mhm.
technical assistance. You can actually charge for those services. So that's another great way to bring in financial sustainability to a nonprofit.
Those are great tips. And I think that, yeah, there's a lot of different things, you can do. I know some clients are very charitable in general. There's a lot of people who would, if a mission or a call or something speaks to them, like these donations are something they could do, especially look at some of the retirees, they have to take money out of their accounts at a certain age. And sometimes they go to their charities, the charities, the causes that they care about for tax reasons and also because it feels good to, make these donations while you're living, instead of feeling like at some point, people would inherit this money, but to put it to work feels really good. So a lot of people are
Mhm.
becoming definitely have always been charitably inclined, but I think it is. I just think it's important that you pointed out different ways to build the revenue stream because I'd imagine that it's hard for nonprofit leaders not to feel compelled to chase down every dollar, even if it means kind of pulling them away from their mission, because of that pressure to build. So, how do you help people stay true to their mission and kind of build that sustainable finance, like you mentioned with the cake? But is it tempting to just try to go to whoever is paying at the time?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I've written so many grants in my lifetime, and I am not a grant writer. And this is, grant writers, they're very talented, skilled people
Hmm.
who just write grants for a living. That
Yes.
is a job unto itself. And with, AI, generative AI, that has really closed the knowledge gap
Hmm.
where it's made it possible for more people without a master's or PhD to write a grant.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. So the more people you ask for donations, the more donations you're going to get.
Yeah.
And the more grant applications you're submitting, the rule I've always kind of based it on is like for every 10 no's, you're going to get one yes.
Yeah.
So this is the other thing about running a
Hmm.
nonprofit is I don't know if thick skin is the right word, but like you have to have a sense of like fortitude unlike no other. And maybe, for From the for-profit side,
Yeah.
it might be the same, but I know as a nonprofit, in my experience, it is, it's pushing that boulder up the hill just to have it roll back down on you and be like, oh, we made some money. Oh, no, that money's all gone and now we've lost that. So it's continuing to push the boulder. It is continuing to apply for grants when you've gotten a million no's. It's continuing to put yourself out there to ask for donations in creative ways or one-on-ones. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, it's a never-ending battle. But I will say this too about grants. A lot of those are built on relationships. So yes, you can write 100 grant applications to maybe get like one or two yeses, but it's really about building relationships with those grant makers and remembering that there are individuals that are approving those grants, just like you, the individual that is applying for it. So find out who is the executive director
Mhm.
of the foundation you want to apply to. Look at nonprofits that are doing similar work to yours and see who their funders are and get to know those people.
Mhm.
They are so used to getting emails of just, hi, my name is, here's what I'm building. Here's why our mission aligns with yours. I'd love to see if we could, meet for a coffee
Mhm.
or a virtual meet or just share more about what we're doing. And just building that relationship, that will lead to way more grant
Yeah.
funding and large support.
It's such a good point. And I remember when I was, you know, going to college, I applied for like every scholarship on the face of this earth. And I got a
Hmm.
bunch of them. And I even
Yeah.
talk with people now, like there's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of small businesses that give out small scholarships for people, and some people say no one's applying. Like, and so I feel like for college that's such a big expense where people are thinking, okay, if it's not a 20,000, I shouldn't even bother with these one, two, three, 10. But I feel like there's a difference between that mindset, and I think that is these nonprofit, these leaders don't take it personally, the no's or the ghosts, and just like consider it like that a job inside itself where you have to keep trying and you have to keep reaching out and you have to keep
Hmm.
connecting. If you get one no, like you have to continue to follow up and keep trying, because I do feel like a lot of times people are just busy or they're caught at the wrong time, but it's hard not to take everything personally and feel like,
It
okay, well,
is,
they're not
yeah.
interested and we don't want to hear no. Like you're gonna have to hear no a lot. And like
Hmm.
you'll hear yeses as well, but I feel like that is just putting in like reps, like exercise. Like you just have to like just keep going and then the bigger ones, because I feel like, and I don't know if this is in every space, but I feel like once you start getting some donors, like I'm sure that it's feels easier
Hmm.
at some point to get more yeses and more interest when someone's
Yes.
interested, like kind of in the VC, in the venture capital space and the investor side. Like it seems that way in the private sector,
Hmm.
that once people are interested, like, oh, now everybody's curious. And so I think that can
Yeah.
be hard work, but like a lot of work in the beginning.
Yeah, you make such a good point about like it's almost like the law of attraction.
Yeah.
So, in having an abundance mindset, I would say that's probably one of my own biggest growth points in the last couple of years in this
Hmm.
space is like in nonprofits, especially, it's really easy to have a scarcity mindset
Yeah.
of like, we have no money, we're counting every penny, we don't want to spend anything, everything needs to be donated. I promise you, if you start having an abundance mindset where you start getting donations or you start getting one or two grants, you look more fundable and sustainable to other people. They're like, oh, this is a legit thing. Like
Yeah.
you're actually making a difference. I can see you growing. I see this happening.
Hmm.
And it does attract more.
Yeah.
It really does. You'll start getting more grants. You'll start getting more donations. I mean, it's just, you start doing A, B, and C, D and E will
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. No, and I
Yeah.
think that is so true. And I think a lot of people, especially like you mentioned, that nonprofit, like that scarcity mindset, it's almost like I think sometimes people who have had to struggle, like it feels more like a badge of, like it almost feels strange, like getting all these big dollars coming
Hmm.
in when like, oh, but like that hustle, scrappy kind of mentality. But I think it is really important for the business to start to adopt that abundance mindset and think about what is possible instead of like, oh, we're struggling because that's kind of what we're supposed to be doing. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily the right mindset for people who are trying to
Hmm.
help as many people as possible.
It's so true. This comes up all the time. Like, there's been this common misconception in the nonprofit space that you shouldn't, like, a good nonprofit doesn't spend more than 3% on overhead or administrative costs. That is ridiculous
Yeah.
and unsustainable. And anybody who's saying they spend 3% is absolutely not being truthful,
Yes.
because the cost to keep your doors open is a real cost, and it's way more than 3%.
Hmm.
So when nonprofits are given general support and not like restricted giving is the worst ever, because nonprofits should be trusted to know where to spend the money
Yeah.
that they get. But when you're given general support and you're able to invest in a fundraiser or invest in a grant writer or invest in a marketing budget, that's when the abundance really starts happening. And you put it really well. There's like almost a badge of honor
Yeah.
for the least money you spend, but that's
Hmm.
not true. If you're not if you have no more money and you're closing your doors, you're helping no one.
Right.
Not a
Yeah.
soul.
No,
Yeah.
it's so important. And it is tricky and it is kind of like, but I got into this work to like, not to go to the big corporate and all the, but I think it is important to
Use
like
their money.
use their
Hey, if
money.
you don't want like yeah, they have millions of dollars in foundations that
Yes.
needs to be used.
Right.
So use their money for good instead of for evil.
Yes.
Like at
I
the
mean
end of the
that
day.
to me, I think that that makes sense because yeah, just relying on one of those things, just relying on individual donors, like just relying like that does make things a little bit, unstable from a foundation. So I think,
Mhm.
if you have, say that you are starting out or you, for one way or the other, are on a tight budget, what are some of the best practices that every like growing nonprofit should try to implement on that end?
Oh, that's such a big question.
Well,
Oh,
I think you
wow.
mentioned budget before, which I think is super
Yeah.
important. Everybody, every business should have a budget. It's just, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to cut everything, but also, I don't know if this is true in your space, but I feel like when I have a budget, I know what I'd want to do next when there's opportunity. So maybe you can't afford certain things in the nonprofit now, but where would you push money once it starts coming in
Mm.
to grow? So I feel like that just having a good idea of the numbers is really important. But are there any other kind of practices that like either they have to do if they want to stay in business from a regulatory side or that you think that they should start to do just to kind of even if things are tight at the moment?
Well, I that's such a great question. So my i- instant answer is investing in leadership. I think there's no way for an organization to sustain or grow if you're not financially supporting the living, like a livable wage for
Yeah.
the leadership,
Hmm.
that they are able to do that work either part-time until it's necessary to become full-time or on a full-time basis. Because if leadership is volunteering and they are needing to have a full-time job to for their
Yeah.
own livability, like that's not sustainable. So
Yeah.
a lot of things in the nonprofit world are true are donated. There is a lot of incredible organizations out there like TechSoup, like Catch a Fire. If you go to not to this is just
Hmm.
shameless plug, there's lots of websites like ours, so you can Google any of this. You don't have to come to thenopi.org, but we've got all these listed as well. But just run a Google search, Google themselves. They have a $10,000 monthly grant to any nonprofit for advertising. Though another podcast, the changing
Yeah.
advertising landscape with AI. But anyway, so just there's a lot out there that is replaceable by free things. People are not. So
Yes.
I think really, if you're going to build a budget for anything, is build a budget to pay your leadership so that they, whether it's one person or two people, they are able to sustain and grow the organization. Everything else can typically be donated.
Yeah, that's such a good point because I think you're right. If people are working full time somewhere else and volunteering like that, maybe their heart is in it, but they have to pay the bills. They have to survive. Like that, it's just not
Mhm.
going to be the priority when it comes down to it because it can't be
Yeah,
until they're able to really feel supported by it. So that's such a good point. I'm curious when it
absolutely.
comes to like fundraising, grants, and partnerships, what are some like pitfalls that you see that organizations face? Maybe before they get to you, like what are some ways that people maybe, get it wrong when it comes to that part of it to try to get that funding in the door? Like, is anything that you would just tell
Oh,
people, like, that there's some common things that you see people start out doing that maybe,
um, oh, that's a good question. But I feel like I feel like the nonprofit world is such a special space. I feel like
Yeah.
there's so much like kindness and understanding that people come from very different backgrounds
Yeah.
and very different experiences and different levels of
Mhm.
education and access. I think couple I feel like it's less the responsibility of the individual to get it right. It's more the responsibility and the changes being adopted by grant makers, that
Okay.
they are starting to lower the barrier and the access. Where I was saying before, to be a grant writer, you have like people with PhDs writing these things
Hmm.
because you have to use the SMART
Yeah.
principle, specific, measurable, attainable, like all those
Yeah.
things. That is not everybody doesn't know that.
Yeah.
And so I think grant makers really creating avenues that lower the barriers to funding. It's less on the individual. I think, again, if you are an earnest person, you're an honest person, you deeply care about what you are doing, and you're open to building relationships,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
um,
No, that's
yeah.
I think that's good to note because I feel like sometimes maybe in for profit businesses, we try to maybe buy a coach that will get us where we want to go, or a service, or like some sort of advertising package. And then people are like, they feel burned by that. But I guess if you're not starting out with like a lot of money to spend and you're
Oh
really
yeah, don't
trying
do
to like,
that. I
you're putting
mean,
your, yeah, like you're putting yourself in like that kindness and that level of like interaction, I think maybe would benefit people, because if you have a fundraiser that flops, like, okay, it probably wasn't like your
yeah.
one huge expense that you were going to try to do. And that's interesting with the grant writing because, are there any things that, like, say people don't have the budget to hire a grant writer and they're doing them on their own? Are there any mistakes that people made? Because you mentioned like some of the AI tools are there, but are they catching on to what is just done by an AI tool when it comes to giving out these grants? Or,
I think most grant makers are very aware when
yeah.
they're like, "Yep, AI wrote this." And I'll tell you something interesting in my work, because I interface with nonprofit leaders like
Hmm.
60 times a day in my inbox. I can tell when they have been writing me in their voice and then when they switch to AI and start
Yeah.
writing to me. And listen, I have an AI tool that helps me manage my inbox. We're customer
Hmm.
service oriented. There's a lot of emails. We repeat a lot of the same information. It makes me sad when I do see people like
Hmm.
AI washing their voice. It
Yeah.
removes who they are as a person, it removes their cultural experience and background. It just sanitizes it so much. And I think it happens because we want to get funded by the
Yeah.
other party. And we are assuming this is what the funder wants to hear. This is what the person we're asked, we have an ask of, wants to hear. I think it's really important, even with the advent of AI and all that it can do, to close the gap um, between the knowledge gap that exists out
Hmm.
there, the experience gaps that exist out there, is still stay true to your why. So if you are a person, say, that is wanting to start a program in your community to help people in recovery and connect them to resources, you're going to help those people. Stay true to your why. Like, I heard this thing the other day that was like, don't ever start your elevator pitch with, "I help people, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah." And I was like, wait, I got to change my whole thing by hearing that. But it's true.
It's
It's
what you
like,
do. Yeah.
yeah, like when I talk to somebody and they're like, after, I lost my cousin to drug addiction, and it broke my heart so badly and it touched our family so deeply. All I want to do is honor their name
Hmm.
and help others that are going through recovery. Like, that is, you share that story
Hmm.
with individual donors, with grant makers, with really anybody that you were trying to ask to support your work, whether financially or in
Hmm.
kind by donating their time or services. Lead with your why, your personal story. And that even comes to writing your grant. Yes, your grant makers are going to be still asking for things like, well, what is the challenge you're trying to, what's the challenge you've identified? How are you going to overcome that challenge? What is your process to do so? What is the timeline in which you're going to do it? And how are you going to measure those results? That's where AI can come in and help fill in those
Hmm.
parts of the application, but sticking to your mission and sticking to your why is really, really important.
It's like, and it's funny because I've heard this in so many different areas. Like when I was talking with somebody about SEO search, and I was talking about like other topics where we're talking about, the changes that AI is making. And it is important to like use it as a tool to like find these grants. Use it as a tool to like figure out some of the admit like that can be super helpful and time saving, like you mentioned, the
Hmm.
emails and things like that. But like it's starting to like search and everything is starting to favor the human part that can't be done by AI. The
Hmm.
stories, the why, those reasons. And so I feel like if you can find a way to like balance that, I think that could be a really helpful way to use the technology that's there. And like,
Yes.
but also knowing that like you said, if you said, I help people in recovery find solutions, like, okay, like I guess that, it's there's others, but I feel like that personal piece of it and that why is really what can kind of help these, nonprofits grow and exist and help more
Hmm.
people because it is really it's really fantastic, some of the work that these, nonprofits are doing. Do you have any success stories that you have with some of the nonprofits that you've worked with that you love?
Yes, I
Yeah.
do. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I love the work we do at
Mhm.
Nopi. I'll talk
Yeah.
about a little bit about fiscal sponsorship. So we did start in 2017 as a nonprofit incubator. And it was truly, we were like building websites to help people like start accepting donations. It was really low stakes at the time. We weren't like doing what we're doing today. So and like people, a lot of people go to the nonprofit space with no nonprofit experience. People in nonprofit space fall into fiscal sponsorship with zero
Mhm.
fiscal sponsorship experience. But what we do here at Nopi, we have about 55 different informal nonprofits, meaning they don't have their own nonprofit
Mhm.
status with the government, um, and grassroots organizations, individuals. So our portfolio is about 55 different projects. We manage $3 to $4 million in donations every year, accepting and distributing those funds for these nonprofits to use. And it is awesome. I got to tell you, I have a very hard time saying no to anyone who applies to our program,
Mhm.
and I have to get my my better halves at the organization to tell me like stop taking on
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah.
But the reason I love it so much and it's hard to say no is because I have seen organizations, oh my gosh, I want to pick a couple. I want to talk about Rivers and Roads in Maine. Let me talk about them.
Mhm.
These are two incredible women that started a program in rural Maine to help kids after school. And they have just been working so hard for the last 3 years to get funding. And they've done it through individual donations, personal donations, volunteering their own time.
Mhm.
I mean, they have done it all. They have been scrappy as all get out. They've reached that 3 year milestone and they are getting grants left and right this year to grow their work. Their staff is finally getting paid. They're able to hire this year. Like it's just seeing that life cycle repeated over and over again. When you've got people that are deeply passionate about what they're doing, they're finding the support and resources, whether it's a
Mhm.
fiscal sponsor, people in their community, just that are willing to give them their time and advise them. I want to just put an aside in this story because I know this was their experience and a lot of people's experience. They will go immediately and think, we need a lawyer. We need a lawyer to help us set this
Mhm.
up. We need a lawyer to advise us. Lawyers do have their place. They understand the law, but when it comes to setting up a nonprofit, so much of that information is already out there. And again,
Mhm.
this is where AI can help, but even before AI, this information is out there on how
Mhm.
to do it yourself or have a fiscal sponsor help you. Don't put money aside for a lawyer, like
Yeah.
just at that stage,
Mhm.
unless you're doing something extremely high risk, like
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
just don't do that. Like just thinking about where finances are.
Mhm.
But anyway, that was an aside of a
That's awesome.
success story.
Yeah.
I've seen so many amazing organizations, people just come through our organization and others that, they've really stuck with it. They lasted those 3 years and now they've really got the financial support they need to keep going and growing.
That must be so exciting to be able to be a part of that. And I mean, even like I can imagine it is hard to say no because it's not like,
Yes.
oh, hey, I want to like get this so I can like create like a more efficient like process. Like I want to help kids after school. Like that,
Hmm.
like they're probably like, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why they want to do this work and they've maybe had an impact in some kids' lives. and then felt like this could be bigger, this could be more, there could be more people to help.
Mhm.
So I love that like, and also again, I feel like that's where that abundance mindset comes in, like finding the right partners and then being like, okay, now at 3 years, maybe everybody's going to want to have some sort of attachment or impact or be able to help these organizations as they grow, because as they mature, I feel like, yeah, you feel like, okay, I know where my money's going to go when I donate it. I know who's doing the work. I know how I'm going to help people, which is just a really nice way to kind of giving money. And I will say this from the financial planning, it is one of the better ways to feel good about your money, even giving $1 out to somebody or giving any money out at all. It feels different than spending it on yourself. And there's research behind it. So like, I think that it is, I think it's something like for everybody to kind of feel like, okay, what do you, outside of work, outside of everything else in your life, what do you care about? What would you want to support? Whether it's sharing their posts if you have no money to give, or doing something to kind
Mhm.
of support them in other ways. That is one of, behavioral finance wise, one of the fastest ways to feel better about your own financial situation. So aside there, but
I
it is
love
super important
that.
to know. So how can listeners learn more about you and the Nopi and engage with your resources if this is something that's really spoken to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is thenopi, thenopi.org. I will say fiscal sponsor practices like ours, it's a lot of us are at capacity because it's
Hmm.
becoming such a more well-known resource for people starting out with a
Hmm.
nonprofit. But we do an open office hours every Thursday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern, and you don't have to be fiscally sponsored by us. Anyone can come, and myself, my coworkers, we can signpost you to resources. We can talk about our work that we do and how we can help. But that's a great resource. And then also, just checking out your like Massachusetts Nonprofit Network is another great resource. But anyway, about talking about ours, we're at capacity. A lot of fiscal sponsors at
Hmm.
capacity, but you can still fill out our application if you're looking for a fiscal sponsor. We've got a wait list until after the new year currently. But one thing I do want to say too, when you're first starting out, there are fiscal sponsors that will work with you from I have an idea phase, from the
Okay.
idea phase. A lot, or like ours, we're about a mid-sized fiscal sponsor. You need to be little bit further along
Hmm.
before we'll take you on.
Yeah.
But there's also dedicated nonprofit incubators that are a great resource. And the one that always comes to mind, Mockingbird
Yep.
Nonprofit Incubator, would be a good one to check out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that information. I feel like there's a lot of people that have this experience or something that's calling them to like do something more, but with that confusion around it and that uncertainty, I think it's really important to know who to go to in that space. And I love that you have those open office hours for people, because that could just be, maybe it's even just listening in on one call or joining and getting pointed in the right direction that can really lead things down very interesting path. So thank you so much, Amanda, for joining me. And
Thank you
thank
for
you
having
everyone for
me.
listening. If you're looking to see how you can include some more charitable giving in your budget, or figure out how you can potentially take this idea you have or something and turn it into a nonprofit, I'd love to speak with you more about it. Head over to mistylynch.com, where you can reach out to me directly, or you can listen to more episodes of the podcast. I do have one on grant writing that I did with Melissa Pond, and it's a completely different set of tools. Super interesting. So you could catch up on Oh, That's So's the podcast. And thanks for joining. We'll talk again next week. Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.